The gravel crunched under their tires as they sped away. I stood there, clutching my cane, the wind snatching at my coat, and realized the laughter wasn't meant to comfort me, it was meant to mock me. My name is Harold Mason. I'm 79 years old. And today, I buried my wife of 52 years. Or at least, I thought I would. We had been married since 1973. Back then, Martha had hair like wildfire and a laugh that could shame church bells. She never liked talking about death, but last year, when the doctors found the tumor, we had no choice. She wanted to be cremated. No service, no flowers, just ashes in an urn and, if it wasn't too much trouble, sprinkled along the creek behind our old house. I promised her I'd take care of it. But promises are easier made when you're not surrounded by people whispering about how he's not all there anymore, or asking your son if maybe assisted living would be safer for everyone. My children Thomas and Elise insisted they'd help with everything. And so, when we arrived at the crematorium that cold Friday morning, they told me gently, "Wait here, we'll get the urn." I waited. I waited 10 minutes. Then 15. I remember the birds overhead falling silent, as if even they sensed something was wrong. The chills settled into my bones. I tightened my grip on the cane Martha had insisted I buy 2 years ago, muttering that a real gentleman never limps into a room without style. That's when I heard it laughter. Not the gentle, warm kind. No, this was sharp, dismissive. And then came the car engine. I turned just in time to see my own son's SUV pulling out from behind the building. Elise was in the passenger seat, wiping tears from her eyes from laughing. I caught Thomas's face in the rearview mirror. He looked relieved. Then they were gone. At first, I refused to believe it. Maybe they forgot something. Maybe they'd be back. But 5 minutes turned to 10. 10 to 20. No one came. Eventually, the woman at the front desk came outside. "Sir?" she asked, peering at me like I was a stray dog. "Do you need help?" "I'm waiting for my children," I replied, voice steady, proud. She gave me that look the one people reserve for the very old or very drunk, half pity, half impatience. "They picked up the urn already," she said softly. "About 15 minutes ago. They said you'd gone home with a neighbor." I said nothing. I just stood there. I'm not sure how long I remained. Long enough for the sun to begin its descent. Long enough for the parking lot to grow quiet. Long enough to know the truth. They had left me. Not just in that moment. No, this was the culmination of years of slow withdrawal. Missed calls. Holidays shortened by excuses. Conversations that grew stale with silence. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped being a father and become a burden. I made my way home alone. 3 buses and a mile on foot. Every step echoing with Martha's absence. The house was cold when I arrived. Colder still when I realized they had taken the key I always kept under the mat, the one Martha made me hide there, just in case. Inside, everything looked the same, but it wasn't. The house had that dead silence of a place freshly emptied of hope. No urn. No note. Just a voicemail from Elise. "Dad, we thought it was best if we kept Mom's ashes for now. You look tired. We'll talk soon." They kept her, as if I wasn't worthy of saying goodbye. I sat in Martha's chair and waited for anger, for sadness. But what came was a crushing numbness, a gray, heavy fog. And in that fog, I remembered. I remembered holding Thomas the day he was born, terrified I'd drop him. I remembered Elise's first day of school, how she clung to my leg. I remembered late-night fevers, scraped knees, bedtime stories, piano recitals, first heartbreaks, college tuition checks I couldn't afford but paid anyway. I gave them everything. And now, they had given me silence. But the thing about silence is that, if you sit in it long enough, it starts to speak. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up and wrote a letter. Then another. Then 10. One to each person who had mattered to me over the years. People I hadn't spoken to in decades. People who remembered me as Harold and Martha, not just the old man who can't remember things. I bought stamps the next morning. Walked to the post office myself. The clerk smiled and asked how I was. I told her, "I'm doing something I should have done a long time ago." That afternoon, I pulled out Martha's old map, marked the creek behind our house, and marked other places too: the picnic spot where we first kissed, the diner where she proposed. Yes, she proposed. The retirement home we'd once laughed about living in together. Then I made a plan. I wasn't going to fade away. If my children wouldn't let me say goodbye, I'd find another way. Because love, real love, doesn't die when someone's gone. It only dies when we stop remembering. And I wasn't about to let Martha be forgotten. Not by them. Not by me. Not by the world. The first place I visited was the creek. It hadn't changed much over the decades. The old wooden bridge still stood, although its rails had grown soft with rot and time. The current still whispered as it wove through the stones and reeds. Martha used to call it our river, even though it was barely wide enough to float a canoe. I stood on the bank and listened. Not to the water, but to her, or at least the echo of her. Her voice wasn't gone. It clung to the wind like a lullaby long out of season. That creek was where she said she wanted to be scattered. To me, it wasn't just about ashes. It was about coming home. But I didn't have her. I sat under the old willow and cried for the first time in years, not because I was weak, but because I finally let myself feel the weight I'd been carrying. Loss, humiliation, abandonment. They were all tangled together in my chest like fishing lines, and now they had finally snapped. I stayed there until dusk. Then I got up, wiped the dirt from my trousers, and walked home with a purpose. That night, I started drafting a will. Not the legal kind I knew my children would fight for what was left no matter what, but something deeper, a will of intention. I wrote out who I wanted to remember me, not out of revenge, not to punish, but to leave behind a different kind of legacy. Because if I couldn't give Martha the farewell she deserved, I would at least live the life she believed I was still capable of. I began with small changes. The next morning, I walked down to the old community center. I hadn't been there in years, not since Martha's knees gave out. The receptionist, a young woman with dreadlocks and sharp eyes, looked at me like I was lost. "I'd like to volunteer," I said. She blinked. "You're here to what?" "I'm 79. I can't lift much, and my memory's not what it used to be, but I've got time. And a voice." That's how I ended up reading aloud to the preschoolers on Wednesdays and helping teach basic English to refugees on Saturdays. It didn't take long before the staff stopped calling me Mr. Mason and started calling me Grandpa Harold. At first, I was skeptical of them. Young people. They always seemed impatient, heads buried in screens. But these kids, these people, they listened. They laughed at my jokes, asked about Martha, brought me snacks when I coughed too long. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel invisible. I wrote to Elise. A short note. "You took the urn. I forgive you, but I won't forget what you did. When you're ready to talk about what really happened and why you know where I live." I never got a response. But 2 weeks later, I got something else, a knock at the door. It was Hannah. She was my neighbor's daughter. Grew up across the street. Now she was 20-something and had just moved back in with her folks. She brought over a tray of cinnamon muffins and a shaky smile. "I heard about what happened," she said. "From Mom. I wanted to check on you." I invited her in. We talked for hours. She told me about her job, how corporate life had chewed her up and spit her out. How she'd come home with the hope of starting a small design business. How she missed the world feeling real. I told her about Martha. About the creek. About the laughter and the car. She didn't say it, but her eyes welled up. "Do you want to get her back?" she asked. "More than anything." "Then let's get her." It started as a joke, but by midnight, it had turned into a plan. We would drive to Elise's house in the city. Ask no. Demand that she return Martha's ashes. Not for vengeance. For closure. We left at sunrise. Hannah drove her old Honda. I packed a thermos of coffee, some sandwiches, and the map. I didn't want to just take the urn and go home. I wanted to take Martha with me. To each place that had mattered. To leave a part of her there, like breadcrumbs of a life well lived. We arrived at Elise's townhouse around 9:30 a.m. She opened the door in a silk robe, mascara smudged like she hadn't slept. She stared at me as if I were a ghost. "Dad, what are you doing here?" "I came for your mother." Her mouth opened, then closed again. "It's not that simple." "It is," I said. "You took her from me." Thomas said. I raised a hand. "Don't tell me what Thomas said. Tell me why you laughed when you left me behind." Her lip trembled. "I didn't want to," she whispered. But you were confused. You kept forgetting things. You said the urn was a cake tin." I remembered that. A moment of fog. A mistake. "And you thought that meant I didn't deserve to grieve?" I asked. She looked away. "I didn't want to see you cry," she admitted. "I didn't know what to do. I panicked." I took a deep breath. "I forgive you. But that doesn't make it right. You stole something sacred. Give her back." Tears spilled down her face. She led me inside. The urn was on her fireplace mantel, surrounded by untouched birthday cards and a dead houseplant. It looked cold there, out of place, as if even Martha's ashes knew they didn't belong. I took it in both hands, held it against my chest, and suddenly, I could breathe again. We didn't stay long. Elise tried to hug me, but I stepped back. Not out of spite, out of honesty. Some bridges, once burned, take time to rebuild. Hannah and I got back on the road. For the next 2 weeks, we traveled. We visited the lake where Martha and I spent our honeymoon in a borrowed tent. We stopped at the high school where we first met, where she passed me a note that said, "You look lonely. Want to fix that?" We went to the diner where she proposed, and I left a single flower and a handful of her ashes in the cracks of the old windowsill. At each stop, I spoke to her. Not out loud, not always, but inside. Quiet, reverent conversations. And slowly, the grief softened. By the time we returned home, the urn was almost empty, but my heart felt full. 1 week later, I received a letter. It was from Elise. "Dad, I don't know if I deserve forgiveness, but I'm trying to understand. I'm starting therapy. I told Thomas we were wrong. I hope one day we can talk. For real this time." I folded the letter and tucked it inside Martha's recipe book. Not everything has to be resolved right away. Some things need to age, like wine or forgiveness. I kept volunteering, kept writing, kept telling Martha's stories. And one day, after reading Goodnight Moon to the kids at the center, one little girl tugged my sleeve and said, "You smile a lot. Were you always this happy?" I looked at her, thought about all the pain, the betrayal, the road back. "No," I said softly, "but I am now." It started with a note, folded neatly and slipped into the crack of my mailbox. No return address, no name, just 6 words written in tight, slanted script. "How did you move past it?" At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe someone meant it for a neighbor. But then another came the next day, scribbled on yellow paper. "My son hasn't called in 3 years. I don't know what I did wrong." Then a third. "I still talk to my wife at night. I pretend she's brushing her hair beside me. Is that crazy?" It hit me like a second grief. I wasn't the only one. There were others. Silent. Overlooked. Sitting in the same lonely kitchens. Replaying the same betrayals. Not just old men like me, but women who'd raised children who never came back, veterans forgotten by their regiments, teachers buried under years of dust and memory. We were still here, but no one saw us. I brought the notes to Hannah. She read them slowly, her thumb lingering on the edges. "You've started something," she said. "I didn't mean to. Doesn't matter. What do you want to do about it?" I looked out the window at the maple tree in my yard, the one Martha and I planted the year Elise was born. Its branches were thinning, but it still stood tall. "I want to make space for them," I said. "A place where we don't have to beg to be remembered." So we did. With Hannah's help, I pitched the idea to the community center, a weekly gathering. Not therapy, not bingo night. Just a circle. Stories, tea, maybe music. A place where being old wasn't the same as being irrelevant. We called it the Remembering Room. The first week, 3 people came. The second, 12. By the 4th week, we had to borrow folding chairs from the church next door. There was Doris, who'd once been a jazz pianist in New Orleans and hadn't touched keys in decades. There was Samir, a Syrian refugee who lost everything in the war but lit up when talking about the cafe his father used to run. There was Mabel, who hadn't spoken above a whisper since her daughter passed in 1999 until she sang an old lullaby and made the whole room cry. We laughed. We wept. We stitched ourselves together, one memory at a time. And the notes kept coming. They weren't just confessions anymore, they were connections. "Thank you for reminding me I still matter. Do you think it's too late to apologize to my brother?" I told my grandson about my first love. He listened. Some were anonymous. Some came with return addresses. I started writing back. Then, with Hannah's encouragement, I began reading them aloud with permission at the start of each Remembering Room meeting. It became a ritual, a kind of communion. One evening, as the group dispersed and I packed up the empty teacups, a tall, quiet man approached me. He'd come every week, but never spoken. "I'm Bill," he said. His voice was gravel and wind. "My wife left me 15 years ago. My kids chose her side. I haven't seen them since." I waited. I thought I'd die before anyone said my name again in a room where it mattered. I nodded, then put my hand on his shoulder. "You're not invisible here, Bill." He choked on a laugh. "You sound like a preacher." I'm just an old man who got left behind and decided not to stay there. News of the group spread. A local reporter came one Wednesday, expecting to find a pitiful gaggle of retirees playing checkers. Instead, she found 80 people holding hands, singing folk songs, and telling stories that could silence a room of cynics. Her article ran with the headline, "They were forgotten. Now they're remembered and remembering." The article reached more than just curious readers. A week later, I received a call. "Harold Mason?" a soft voice asked. "This is he. This is Thomas." I nearly dropped the phone. "I read the article," he said. "Too didn't know you were doing all this." "You never asked," I said. He exhaled slowly. "I didn't know how. I was ashamed. I still am." Silence. Then, "Can I come visit?" When he arrived, he looked thinner, older, not in the way of age, but of guilt. He stood on my porch like a man afraid to knock. I opened the door before he had to. He broke down as soon as he saw me. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I used to help him with math homework. I poured him a cup of tea. "Not because he asked, because it's what Martha would have done." "I messed up," he said. "We thought we were protecting you. But we were protecting ourselves. From seeing you break. From feeling what we couldn't handle." I said nothing. I told Elise what I did. She cried for an hour. She's going to come, too. Someday. Still, I said nothing. "I don't expect forgiveness," he whispered. "I just want to start again. If you'll let me." I looked at his hands. The same hands I held on his first day of school. The same ones that had pushed me away. "You'll have to earn it," I said. "I will. You'll have to come to the remembering room." He looked up, surprised. "And listen," I added, "to every story, even the ones that make you squirm." He nodded. "I will." And he did. The next week, he sat beside me in the circle, quiet, humbled. He listened as Mabel talked about her daughter, as Doris played a chord progression that made the room sigh, as Bill admitted he hadn't slept through the night in 6 years. And then, in a voice thick with regret, Thomas spoke. "My dad, he didn't forget us. We forgot him. But not anymore. I'm here to remember." Weeks passed. Seasons shifted. I turned 80 that spring. The Remembering Room hosted a party. There were balloons, cards, laughter, the kind that healed instead of mocked. They gave me a handmade book filled with letters and drawings and stories I didn't know I had inspired. And at the very back, one message from Hannah. "You helped me remember who I wanted to be. Thank you for reminding us all we're still alive." I looked up from the note, tears clouding my eyes. Outside, the wind whispered through the leaves. Martha would have loved this. Not the party, not the cake, but the rebirth. She once told me, "When you feel forgotten, go remind the world who you are." Now I finally understood what she meant. The more I spoke, the more people found me. Some through word of mouth, some through newspaper articles or a segment that aired on local television. But most came because they needed to be heard, and something in my voice or my story gave them permission to open their own mouths. There was Larry, who admitted he hadn't spoken to anyone in nearly 2 months until he read about our meetings. "I thought no one cared," he said, staring at the teacup in his hand. "Not until I heard your story on the radio. I figured, maybe I could still be part of something." There was Gloria, who used to be a midwife and still remembered every baby she ever delivered. She came with a shoebox full of notes from families she'd helped, each one yellowed with time. When she read them aloud, her voice trembled, not from age, but from recognition. She mattered. Once. And now again. We even had a small group of teenagers from the local high school who started volunteering to help carry chairs, serve drinks, or just sit and listen. I watched them change week by week, their guarded stares softening as they realized these old souls had stories far richer than anything scrolling on their screens. I told them, there's a reason we call it remembering. It's not about nostalgia. It's about piecing yourself back together. And that became our motto. One day, I brought a photo of Martha and me dancing at our 50th anniversary and placed it on the center table. She wore a red dress. I wore a suit 2 sizes too big. We were laughing, her eyes squinting with joy. Everyone paused when they saw it. "She looks like someone who didn't take nonsense from anybody," one woman said. "She didn't," I smiled. "And she still doesn't." "Where is she now?" another asked gently. I put my hand to my chest. "Here. Everywhere. I carry her with me." They nodded. Not out of politeness, out of understanding. That afternoon, Hannah proposed an idea. "Why don't we make this more permanent? A community project. A book. We collect everyone's story. A living archive. I hesitated. Who would read it? She shrugged. The right people. It took 6 months. Each week, someone would dictate their memories. Hannah would transcribe. I'd edit. And then, little by little, the book took shape. We titled it, Still Here, Stories from the Edges of the Map. When the first print run arrived, 24 paperback copies, I ran my fingers over the names on the back. They weren't famous. They weren't celebrities. But to us, they were giants. We held a launch night at the community center. Over 100 people came. Thomas was there. Elise too. She approached me slowly, her hands shaking. I read your part in the book, she said. And I cried. I did too, I admitted. She looked down. I'm sorry. Not just for the urn. For all of it. For stepping away when I should have stepped forward. I saw my daughter again that night. Not the grown woman who'd betrayed me, but the little girl who used to bring me wildflowers with dirt still clinging to the roots. I want to come to the remembering room, she whispered. You already have, I said. The next morning, I sat by the creek alone. It had rained the night before. The water ran fast and clean, and the willow tree cast a long shadow across the surface. I brought the empty urn with me. Not to mourn, but to honor. I whispered, I did what I promised, Martha. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out the final pinch of her ashes. Not to scatter, but to return to the earth beneath our feet. A breeze lifted the hem of my coat. I imagined it was her hand, tugging me gently, like she used to do in bed when she wanted me to roll over and stop snoring. You were right, I said aloud. Love doesn't end. It just changes shape. Behind me, I heard footsteps. I turned to see Elise walking toward me, slowly, a blanket draped over one arm and a paper cup in the other. I thought you might be cold, she said. We sat in silence for a long while, listening to the creek, watching 2 birds squabble over a branch. She finally asked, Do you think it's too late to fix things? I looked at her, really looked at her. No, I said, but it starts by listening. She nodded, then pulled out a small notebook. Then maybe, you can tell me what I missed. About her. About you. I smiled. I thought you'd never ask. Later that week, during the Remembering Room meeting, I didn't sit in the circle. I stood at the front. Not to lecture, but to pass the torch. I started this group because I thought I was alone, I said. But you proved me wrong. Again and again. I looked around the room, faces lined with age, but eyes bright with something fiercer than youth. Presence. I'm not leaving, I added. But I'm stepping back. Because the point of remembering isn't to dwell in the past. It's to connect. And you've all done that better than I ever could. The room clapped. Some cried. Mabel brought a pie. Samir played a song on his oud. Thomas sat beside Bill, nodding to the rhythm like they were old friends. When the meeting ended, Hannah hugged me. You changed lives, Harold. No, I corrected. We did. She smiled. Still, you should be proud. I am. That night, I found myself writing again. This time, it wasn't letters. It was a new kind of will. Not a will of wealth or possessions, but of legacy. I wrote, let them remember not how I died, but how I lived after the breaking, how I turned silence into song, betrayal into bridges, and ashes into roots. Let them say, he was left behind, and still, he chose to walk forward. That's enough. Spring faded into summer. The trees outside my window thickened with leaves, and the garden Martha once tended now lovingly revived by Hannah, and her young volunteers bloomed with daffodils, foxglove, and wild lavender. The house, once so quiet you could hear the sighs of the walls, now thrummed with visits, conversations, even laughter. Thomas brought over his kids one afternoon. They were shy at first. Teenagers both taller than I remembered, polite in the way children are when they don't know where they stand with you. I didn't tell them what happened, Thomas admitted. Just that I want them to know their grandfather. I nodded. That's enough. We played cards. I taught them gin rummy. They taught me how to use the voice-to-text feature on my phone, though I still preferred a pen and notebook. And slowly, the silence between us began to dissolve. Elise came often too. She always brought something: a casserole, new socks, a copy of a book she thought I might like. But the most important thing she brought was time. We didn't talk about the urn. Not anymore. Some things don't need to be revisited once they've been owned and forgiven. One day, as we watched the garden from the porch swing, she said quietly, I've been writing again. Just little things. Poems mostly. I looked at her, surprised. You stopped. She nodded. For a long time. But then I read the book you helped create. Still here. And I realized. I want to be part of that chorus again. I placed a hand on hers. You never left it, I said. You just needed to find your voice again. The remembering room kept growing. Not just in size, but in spirit. A woman from the next county started a similar group. Then another town followed suit. Someone created a website, a simple one, where elders could submit short stories or reflections to be archived, celebrated. It was called the Map of Us, a living, growing constellation of lives once overlooked. I received messages from as far as Oregon and Maine. One man, a retired coal miner from West Virginia, wrote, I always thought no one would care if I disappeared. Then I found your story. Now I know my voice still matters. Sometimes, late at night, I would reread the older letters, the first ones that showed up in my mailbox like whispers from the invisible. They were still tucked inside a box labeled Martha and everything after. And every time I opened it, I felt less alone. Then came the day I knew was coming. I woke up and something was different. Not painful, just quiet. Inside my body, like a room being tidied, folded in on itself. I had been forgetting more things lately. Words slipping through cracks. Names I used to summon effortlessly now floated just out of reach. The doctor called it cognitive decline. I called it time doing what time always does. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. I spent the morning writing letters, real ones this time, sealed with envelopes and stamps. One to Thomas, one to Elise, one to Hannah, and one to the remembering room. I even wrote one to Martha. Then I packed a bag. Not a suitcase, just a small canvas satchel. Inside I placed my notebook, a copy of Still Here, Martha's last handkerchief, a folded paper star from one of the preschoolers, and one smooth stone from the creek. I left the house around 4 p.m. Didn't tell anyone where I was going. Some things you need to do alone. The walk to the creek took longer than it used to. My knees protested. My breath came short. But my heart, that old warrior, beat steady. When I arrived, the water shimmered under a golden sky. I sat beneath the willow tree. Listened. Not just to the rush of water or the rustle of leaves. I listened for Martha. And I heard her. Not in words. Not even in thoughts. But in presence. It felt like sitting beside a fire that had never gone out, only burned softer, deeper. I laid back, closed my eyes. And for a moment, maybe the last moment, I felt complete. Not because everything had been fixed, but because I had chosen connection over bitterness. Because I had turned a wound into a window. Because I had remembered. They found me the next morning. Thomas was the one who discovered me. He said I looked like I was asleep. Peaceful. Hands folded over the bag. Head resting against the tree trunk. A faint smile on my face. The letter to him was in my lap. Son, thank you for coming back to me. That's all a father ever wants, not perfection, not repayment, just return. Tell Elise she gave me my voice back. Tell Hannah she gave me flight. And tell Martha I made it to the creek. I am not gone. I am only elsewhere. Love always. Dad. At the remembering room, they held a small gathering. Not a funeral. A circle. They placed my picture on the center table, the one from my 80th birthday, surrounded by flowers from the garden and stones from the creek. Everyone shared a memory. Mabel sang. Samir played a farewell melody. Elise read one of her poems. And Hannah, holding back tears, said, Harold didn't teach us how to die. He taught us how to stay alive, even when the world tries to forget you. She placed her hand on my photo. He remembered for all of us. And now, we will remember him. Epilogue. Somewhere in a quiet library, there is a copy of Still Here with dog-eared pages and ink-smudged corners. On the inside cover, written in black ink, is a simple dedication. For those who were left behind and chose to walk forward anyway. And in a back room of the community center, beneath the bulletin board covered in postcards and scribbled letters, hangs a plaque. The Remembering Room. Founded by Harold Mason, 194-5-2025. He waited. They left. He stood up anyway. Still here.